This is RiverTalks with Jonathan Brush, President and CEO of Unbound.
Here's something that took me a long time to figure out. In fact, I'm not entirely sure I really even figured it out or realized it until recently when I listened to Nathan Rittenhouse and the Thinking Out Loud make this point. And the point he made in the podcast was that the Bible doesn't have anything about writing an evangelism curriculum. There's no verse about that, but there's lots and lots of verses about hospitality. Well, that was the perspective shift that got me thinking. And that thinking led me in some interesting directions. And so, using Nathan as the source of that kind of line of thinking, let me expand it a little bit and go in a slightly different direction. As I was growing up, there was a massive emphasis on my life in teaching leadership. I was part of the Boy Scouts. I became an Eagle Scout. I served as a senior patrol leader, which is a big leadership position in the Scouts. I was president of my church youth group. I had leadership positions throughout high school and then into college. And I remember a very strong sense of emptiness and a sense of loss when I entered into the professional world post-college. And I realized to some extent I was starting at the bottom of the leadership structure, and that now reaching the top of the leadership structure was going to likely be measured in many, many more years. Well, I was uniquely blessed in that for me, I had a strange circumstance where by God's grace, I did get into a leadership position pretty early. And so I can look back on life and say that I have learned a lot about leadership and I've spent a lot of time in leadership positions. Okay, so far so good. I listened to the lessons, I paid attention, and in my own life, I got a bit of an anomaly thrown at me, and I got an opportunity to practice those things in a really interesting way. Here's what I didn't understand, and here's what took me a lot longer to learn. Well, I certainly am grateful for those leadership experiences, and I learned a lot from doing those things, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve that way. Leadership in and of itself and leadership positions didn't change my life nearly as much, not even a fraction as much as hospitality did. And hospitality was not something I was necessarily taught, certainly not specifically. By example, certainly, my parents were hospitable to open their home to my friends and to others on a regular basis. It was a humble home. We didn't have a lot, and yet it was constantly open to those around us, and so that was a great example. But I was never told that that was like a thing to do, nor was I trained in the ways to be hospitable, nor later in life did I deliberately chase after being hospitable or practicing hospitality. Instead, by God's grace, I kind of got thrust into it. And so I didn't practice hospitality for a good chunk of my post-college, early professional and family life. And then a set of circumstances arose that ended up having us throwing our home open to increasing amounts of people, not because we decided to, not because we thought it was a good idea, not because we had studied things deeply and figured it out. We weren't that smart. Really, because God just put it in our way in such a way that it was impossible to be ignored, and we had to do it. And when I say had to, it was a hardship. It just wasn't something we thought about. It was something we just sort of did. And when I say we, of course, I'm talking about my wife and myself. And now what's interesting is looking at my life and what is going on in my life in terms of leadership. I'm in the probably largest leadership role I've ever been in my life. And in hospitality, I'm in a part of my life where we probably practice more hospitality than we have before. There is no question between which has made the biggest impact on my life. The hospitality piece outstrips the leadership piece in every possible way of measuring, in every kind of way that you would look at it. In terms of the impact it's had on my life, I think in the impact it's had on other people's lives, at least, certainly in the impact it's had on the lives of my children and the lives of my family. And I think that's a really powerful perspective. My leadership positions are, for the most part, determined by things that are mostly out of my control. Now, certainly, I can practice how good of a leader I am. I can do my best to learn those skills and to practice those skills and to lead well. And that's inside of my realm of responsibility and my ability to do something about. But on a greater scale, those leadership abilities that I've had, leadership positions I've had, they have been determined by circumstances far beyond my control. they have been far more matters of timing and God's provision than they are anything that I've actually been able to do. And yet, hospitality is something totally different. Now, we started practicing hospitality because God pressed us into it by God's grace, and we do all things through God who strengthens us, of course. But the point here is that hospitality is open to everybody. And if we have a flip side of this, I look at all the years that we didn't practice hospitality when we could have to some extent, and I see those as wasted opportunities. In other words, it doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter how much you have or don't have, it really doesn't matter your circumstances. The ability to open your home and to not just open your home, but to share what you have in a relational way, in a way that invites people in. Now, certainly, when we think about this, we tend to think of hospitality as inviting people into your home, and that's a big part of it. But in a bigger way, it's sharing your life with people. One time I had an example of this in the church. I attended a church for some time. I never really felt at home until an older couple invited us to their house for dinner after church. And there was something about sharing dinner with them in their home that all of a sudden made us feel part of the family. And when another couple then invited us to go to dinner with them at a restaurant, not even at their home, it really sealed the deal. All of a sudden, we felt like we were part of that community in a way that we hadn't before. And so there's this aspect of sharing even a meal together. One time, a pastor that I was talking to, when asked to define the church, he said, "I think the church are people who routinely break bread together." At the time, I thought that was a bit of a strange statement. It didn't make a ton of sense to me. And yet, as years have gone by from that meeting, more and more I think that's a pretty good description of the church. A group of people who consistently eat together in the church fellowship hall, in each other's homes, maybe at local restaurants. That is some form of practicing hospitality. And the more people break bread together, the more people eat together, the more time people share together, the deeper the relationships are formed, the richer their lives become. Both those who are practicing hospitality and accepting others in, and those who are getting to experience that hospitality. So now, if you were to ask me, what is it that you could learn, the skill that you could learn as a young person to make the biggest difference in your life? Or if you're at any point in age and you'd say, what is it that would be the most valuable, most important thing I could do? It's not leadership. It's not some sort of financial or business understanding. It's not the things that we typically talk about when we talk about success. My perspective now would be that the principle I would point you to is this principle of hospitality. That the more you're able to welcome others into your life, in whatever way you're able to do that, the deeper, richer, and more meaningful your life will be.